And I'll give you the shortcut. The short recipe for influence without authority goes something like this. You need alignment and permission. Those are the two pieces of the puzzle. If you have alignment, meaning you know what they want and you can align what you want with it because they're your boss, not the other way around. If you know what they care about and you can find how what you want aligns with it and you get permission to help them get what they want, you have secured the ability to hold that person accountable, set expectations, give feedback, and do all the things required. Doesn't mean it won't be filled with some friction, but because you got permission and because you're both going the same direction, it's going to be a lot easier.
And that goes, in work, your teammates, goes at home, goes coaching baseball, soccer, whatever. You're dealing with your wife.
Building a legacy starts with the bold decision to take a leap of faith. Behind every empire lies a foundation of grit, willpower, and the courage to take big risks. Welcome to Entrepreneurship Unlocked, where world shakers in the business world gather to share their stories. We're diving deep into the mindset of the modern entrepreneur to show you exactly what it takes to become truly unlocked. Join us in the pursuit of excellence with your host, Seth Rudin. This is Entrepreneurship Unlocked.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Entrepreneurship Unlocked. I am Seth Rudin, your Pacific Northwest business broker covering Washington, Oregon, and California. I have the honor of introducing Mr. Erik Berglund of Luminary.ai. Luminary AI helps leaders practice and prepare themselves for the management discussions, the sales discussions, or any critical conversation that you need to have. So please allow Erik to introduce himself and we'll get started into this great upcoming podcast. Thank you.
Seth, thanks so much for having me. You nailed it. Preparation is key. And whether it's athletes, whether it's business leaders, salespeople, customer success, legal, finance, accounting, restoration technicians, trades, it doesn't matter. You have performances in your business that are controlled by how effective your people are at communicating. And if you're trying to build a robust business that survives you exiting it, you're going to need to make sure you got a handful of those folks in your company because it's going to increase the value of it and the likelihood that someone's attracted to your business in the first place. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Glad to have you. And for the buyers and entrepreneurs who are listening, his frameworks are exactly what you need to transform your hero-based business into a scalable asset. And I'm very glad to have you here.
Thanks so much. You nailed it. The leaders who develop a team that survives and functions without them and thrives in their absence actually becomes a heck of a lot easier to market and sell that business. It's going to be worth more and more interesting to somebody. And that's 100% a function of how a leader effectively sets expectations, holds people accountable, and gets them to receive feedback. And cultures that do that makes it a lot easier for a company to sell. So I'm eager to go deep on it with you. Tell me where you want to go next.
Yeah, we've talked, you often state that leadership isn't for everyone and that founders and buyers that are listening, I'm sure they want to know, what are the hidden signs that a brilliant technical operator or key hire actually shouldn't be pushed into a leadership role?
Well, I think it's a great place to start. There's no efficient way to do something that doesn't need to be done. And the number of technical founders or product-oriented founders who find themselves needing to scale a team and being like, oh my God, this is horrible. I want nothing to do with this. You don't have to go become a great leader. You can hire one. There are awesome leaders who would love to go lead a company where they don't have to do product, where they just get to lead people. Maybe they also like the commercialization side of it. You can find that person and hire them if you know how to determine what a good leader is. And a good leader is not somebody who has a lot of leadership experience, by the way. You'll meet lots of leaders with 20 years of experience who actually have 1 year of experience 20 times. They stopped getting better at the things that really matter. But if you're that leader, you're recognizing, I don't want to have to do those things. The good news is you don't have to. The other news is you can. At the end of the day, leadership is a skill. Just like basketball is a skill, just like any sport, any book you've ever wanted to write, any instrument you've ever wanted to play, you can get better at these things with intentional practice. You just have to know what you're practicing, get good feedback on it. But you could go become that leader, but you don't have to. And the reason I say that leadership isn't for everybody is because, frankly, it's not all that fun if you don't love it. I used to lead a sales team that I led 16 people in sales in a global manufacturing company. And every time I had to hire, I'd go through this process of asking in the interview, well, what do you see? You know, what are you looking for in your career? And every salesperson thinks the right answer to that question is, I want to be a sales manager someday. And I found myself being like, no, you don't. Like, I don't get to do any of the fun salespeople stuff as a sales leader. And that's often the case. You have to really enjoy developing other people. You have to be really committed to the empathy and the talent development of the people that you lead. And if you don't find yourself naturally drawn to that, it might be fair to recognize that you should solve for that problem in a different way, which is either level yourself up so that it's less stress and something you actually could find yourself enjoying, or the good news is there's a lot of talented leaders out there who'd love a great company to work for. And if you want to be an awesome boss to them, go hire a leader, go hire a GM, and probably watch your company thrive more than if you forced yourself through it.
Yeah, a couple of things here. My friend, he just went being a sales manager, and now he's going to help lead a new service out as an IC, individual contributor, and he's happier, right? He doesn't have the burden,
Yeah.
but
So common.
But maybe if he had had your practice and your tips, he might have, enjoyed it a little bit better, because he would have, learned the right way to go about it, at least practicing it and preparing for it.
Yeah,
My old boss.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please.
Well, the typical friction leaders bump into when they go from an IC to becoming a leader is that their phone rings all the damn time, is that they have an unlimited number of emails. They get dragged into things that they know how to do, and because they know how to do them, they get dragged into doing them all the time. And if they instead just learned boundary setting, expectation setting, and holding people accountable, they would find that they can take a vacation without having to be tethered to their computer. They would find that their people come up with their own ideas and solutions instead of bringing them problems all the time. They would find they get a focus on the strategic part of the business rather than the tactical. The trap is that they know the tactical. Quite often leaders who grew up in the industry that they go on to lead in know all of the shortcuts. And because they know the shortcuts, they see every problem through the lens of, I could do it faster myself rather than having this person do it. And if they didn't know those shortcuts, they would have no choice but to be an effective leader and make that other person solve their problem. And so one of the best indicators of a good leader is somebody who's led in multiple companies where they actually don't know what their team does. The best engineering leaders are the ones who were not engineers. They couldn't possibly solve the problem on their own. They had to develop leadership skills instead. And so you're right, your friend who went from leader to IC, who never maybe learned how to do those things, got burned out being everywhere all the time for everybody. And it's a lot more fun to just go sling stuff than it is to be struggling with that all the time. So it doesn't surprise me. That's pretty common tale.
100%. I worked at Dell, and the VP, who I respected a lot, he said management's like a black box in these corporations. They don't teach you, how to be a manager as you're growing. They take the top performers and they're like, hey, you got great results. You probably can lead this team. And now this magic 8-ball doesn't really do the things like what you hit on. I thought was awesome that, the best managers that weren't the engineers managing engineers. It was a marketing guy maybe leading these engineers, whatever it is. Yeah,
the overlap of, it's such a common problem. Everybody's heard it, right? You take your top performer, you promote them to be a leader. They don't end up being that great of a leader of those people. And it's really because the Venn diagrams of the required skills to be excellent as a leader barely overlaps with the skills required to be excellent as an individual contributor in most fields. Now, in sales, for example, my background, it overlaps more than the average, because to be a really good salespeople, there's a better than average chance you have the ability to validate what somebody says, ask good questions that are open-ended, and tie together what's good for that person with what you want them to do. Like, those are native skills to a good salesperson most of the time. And those are parallel to some pretty powerful leadership skills. But if you're in any other field, it's going to be very difficult for your accounting expertise, your legal expertise, your engineering expertise to have many overlapping skills that are required of you as a leader. And so you're just ill prepared. And to your friend's point, no company trains this very well. That was the origin of the language of leadership, is I want to go train people to know how to have these conversations because nobody trained me. And that's what's led to Luminary, which is we wanted to create a more scalable way to do that across multiple industries, rather than the service-based business I had built. So it's a common problem, and I'm glad it is, because it's going to keep me employed for a while.
I bet it will. You can see it. As a business grows, right, their responsibilities will grow. They'll get a board, they'll have a bigger team. What can leaders do to adapt their communication style to be successful at each of these levels?
You bring up a great point. We call it influence without authority. And if you're a corporate citizen, or you're the CEO who has a board, or even if you're not, even if you're just married, or you have children or peers, or you're part of a community, you know what it feels like to have to influence without authority. If you've ever tried to lead a volunteer organization, you know what it's like to feel handcuffed and neutered by the relationship you have with the person, where you don't have the typical employer-employee dynamic, and you need a different skill set for that. The good news that I have for you is it's actually not a different skill set. The common conversations you have with your employees are the same ones you're going to have with your peers, right? Picture yourself being, I don't know, you're head of a vertical in a company, and your work intersects with some other vertical. Marketing and sales are common examples of this. You might need to hold that person's employee accountable. You're not their boss, or you need to hold your peer accountable, or your peer's boss accountable, or yours. How you do that is still a function of what you say and how you say it. And the conversations still revolve around, did I set expectations well? Did I get permission to share feedback? Did I create a pathway for holding somebody accountable? You just have to get permission to do those things beforehand. So learning those skills of how do you hold somebody accountable who's not your boss is very powerful. And it's actually, frankly, candidly, kind of a pain in the butt, because my wife's helped me build a bunch of these things, and she knows how to hold me pretty accountable now because of it. But it works. And I'll give you the shortcut. The short recipe for influence without authority goes something like this. You need alignment and permission. Those are the two pieces of the puzzle. If you have alignment, meaning you know what they want and you can align what you want with it, because they're your boss, not the other way around, or they're your peer who you're merging with them, not the other way around. If you know what they care about and you can find how what you want aligns with it, and you get permission to help them get what they want, you have secured the ability to hold that person accountable, set expectations, give feedback, and do all the things required. Doesn't mean it won't be filled with some friction, but because you got permission and because you're both going the same direction, it's going to be a lot easier. And there's conversational tracks that support that, but those are the two pieces of the puzzle to be able to influence without authority.
And that goes, in work, your teammates, it goes at home, goes coaching baseball, soccer, whatever.
Yeah, how about those
We're
parents?
dealing with your wife.
You're a baseball coach. You got to work with parents who are pretty invested or underinvested in their kid playing in that field. How do you give them feedback? How do you tell them? We do this. We build in Luminary. We build skill simulators for elite youth soccer referees. They're coaching Olympic development players and reffing Olympic development players, and those parents have invested an enormous amount of money in their kid playing this sport for a long time. How do you, as a parent, how do you as the coach go share with the parent that their kid's not hacking it on the field very well? Like, you can, and it's your job to do so, but that's not an easy conversation. If you could practice it a few times, it'd probably go better. So we find a lot of application for those influence without authority dynamics.
I bet. You hear a lot about emotional intelligence. It's off the spectrum that most people, unless they went to school, might have heard about it, but it's so important from my experience. And implementing under pressure can be difficult. Is there a practical framework that for stressed business owners that they can use to maintain a high IQ during a crisis?
Great question. I can't not reference the books Emotional Intelligence and Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Like, if you really want the playbook for learning that, go read either of those books and do the exercises, because they're phenomenal ways for a person to get better at recognizing their own emotions and how they're affected, and what other people's emotions are and how they work together. That quadrant that they built is, I think, the right source of truth to refer back to when it comes to emotional intelligence. But most of the time, if you just got good at asking a validation question and empathizing with a person, you would probably dramatically improve the quality of your results in any of your human-to-human interactions. Now, how this sounds is going to be subjective to the environment you're in and the situation, right? But if a person shares something with you, if they're talking at you and you simply had the patience to say, what I'm hearing you say is this, is that correct? Or, I think what I'm picking up is this, but I want to make sure before I respond that I heard you correctly. If you just inserted those words into the vast majority of the tense situations you deal with, you would probably create a pretty meaningful improvement in how that interaction goes. And if you do that a couple times, you'll find it's not nearly as awkward as you think it is. And that people's eyes actually change when you say it to them. Their body language will soften. Their eyes will act like, they'll go like this. If you can't see me, I'm leaning in. My head's cocked to the side like a puppy dog. Like, we love it when people actually hear us. And if you can simply say, hey, Seth, I think what you're getting at is this, but I just want to make sure, is that accurate? Am I picking that up correctly? You'll notice my tonality is questioning. I'm not saying, Seth, what you're saying is this, right? Now I'm being authoritative, downward tones, harsher consonants. So there's some nuance to it. But if you could simply validate in that tense moment, you'd probably do better. So that'd be tactic one. Tactic two is
Love it.
love silence. If you just pause like I just did, where it gets almost uncomfortable and Seth leans into the mic because he feels like maybe it's his job to speak. If you just learn to use silence a little bit better, people will probably talk more and fill in space that gives you more time to process. I consider it twofold. One, it often will get them to reveal information they may not have otherwise. Two, it gives you time to process. If you can just pause long enough that the other person feels like they have to speak and then they do, now your brain can think a little bit more rather than feeling the crunch of real-time processing necessary. So learn to use silence intentionally. That'd be really valid. And the last would be emotional empathy is going to go a long ways. Hey, Seth, I can tell this is really frustrating, man. I don't know that we can get to the bottom of it, but I just want to let you know I see it. And that's got to be hard to deal with. I'm sorry you're struggling with that. Validate the emotion when it's obvious. And again, people love being heard, seen, and valued. You may not fix anything with the person, but if you saw them as a human being and heard them, man, you're going to get so much farther. And go read the EQ books. They're going to help you out a ton as well.
Totally agree. Even when I was a bank teller, that was one of the training was talk soft. Pause, talk soft, let them hear themselves over you. And all of a sudden the customer lowers their voice and they come back to rationale. So
absolutely.
In a negotiation, same thing, right? It gets heated. You know, we're selling businesses for a living, right? And obviously the buyer seller negotiation can get heated. And so, you know, those tactics are definitely used.
What have you found, right? You're in that negotiation phase with the business. You're at a point where you could close the deal potentially, your customers could. What have you found that is helpful to raise the EQ in that room? Since it's not your decision to make, you have to be the influence of it. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I represent the seller in that case, right? So, you know, if we're in a heated discussion, you know, it'll be, hey, you know, let's take a step back. Let's just make sure we understand what the facts are. Here's where we're at. Everybody agree. You know, once you reach agreement on the facts, then people will dial it down. If you need to, you take a step out of the room, take a break, come back. But, you know, really what you said is speak slow, intentional, make sure that you know that you're heard, and then, you know, speak at them, right? You're speak to the issues and saying, from what I understand, you're concerned with this person's leaving and you want this person to stay longer. Well, this person has an issue, right? So let's work through how do we get that void fixed and come up with a solution, and then take it one by one. You can't take the whole piece enchilada all at the same time. And then you get there. They felt heard. You spoke to them respectfully. You know, at times when they're yelling back at you, you got to remember not to yell back.
Sure.
And as long as you do that, you'll do well.
Well, you brought up a fourth point there, ask questions. Right? The end state of your validation of them and your clarification and soft speaking was, how do we, right? It was an open-ended question that causes the other person to turn their brain on and participate. A lot of the time, we ask closed-ended questions that begin with is, do, can, or would. Would you think about this? Is this possible? Can you do that? Those aren't terrible. They're just open and closed-ended. All the person has to do is say no, and they're just off the hook. If instead you ask questions like who, what, when, where, or how, who else could be involved in this? When's the right place for us to sit down and have that conversation? What would need to be true in order for that to work? How could we overcome this if we had to? Now both parties are trying to solve the same problem. The subtle change in your language around a question goes a long ways in those situations as well.
You know, something that comes to mind as you're talking is, are people born natural leaders, or is that something that they can be learned?
Leadership can absolutely be learned. People are absolutely born faster processors verbally, right? There are people who are excellent at processing in the moment very quickly, and others who would come up with just as good of an answer. They just aren't going to get it done that quickly or under a stressful live right in front of you moment. There are people who are more gifted orators, who are more comfortable verbally than in writing. So there's definitely different variables that help leaders. more charm, more charisma, better smile, whatever. But the core skill of leadership is the ability to influence somebody towards an advantage. That's what a leader does. That's the verb of leading. Can you influence a person towards an advantage? An advantage is an improved situation. Influence is being the proximal cause of change. So can you get somebody to do something they wouldn't do that gets them into an advantage situation? That's what it means to be a leader. Can you learn how to do that? You absolutely can. Now, can everybody be as good of a leader as everybody else? No. The ceiling, it might be higher for somebody else. But is everybody capable of being a pretty damn good leader because they adapted some EQ, they learned some validation and some empathy, they learned how to ask open-ended questions, and they understood there's literally only 5 different really hard leadership conversations need to have. We teach 8 different conversations in the language of leadership. 90% of real world leadership situations come down to 5 conversations. Can you learn how to have 5 conversations? Yeah, yeah, you absolutely can. There's nothing that prevents most people from being a really good leader. Being an exceptional leader is, probably harder to attain for everybody.
Makes sense. It's such an important skill, and that goes back to that black box, right? If they have the right tools, then you can open up that magic 8 ball, right, and become a leader and take that out of them.
Well, and going back to the core question for your audience, how do you build a more profitable business that's easier for you to exit when you want to be able to do so? You don't have to probably be a great leader to do that, but it's going to be a lot harder. And if you don't leave the future owner human capital that's competent and capable of operating without you, you're probably not going to be as attractive or worth as much to that buyer. And so it isn't just that it would be good for everybody. It's that it's probably hypercritical for most business owners to do this if they want to be able to leave something to somebody else. And not doing so is easy. It's so easy to avoid becoming a good leader because you're a business owner. You got a ton of things to do, man. I am. But ignoring this skill is quite expensive in a whole bunch of different ways.
Well, I think it's 2 parts. To get the most value, it's not only becoming a good leader yourself, but it's developing that next person below you, right? So when the buyer buys it, he has the leader, and they can work on the business and not in the business, which is to your point. One of the major, bottlenecks to this point, right, is, for entrepreneurs is converting that top individual performance, right, to leaders and having passive managers into active drivers. And, Luminary obviously helps build that platform. Did you want to shed some light how that helps?
Yeah, the tried and true method that companies think they have for leaders is promote the most senior person and thrust them into a position where they have to sink or swim. And if they sink, they were never the right person anyway. And if they swim, then we did such a good job of promoting them. That's the unspoken internal mindset most companies have around leadership development inside of their companies. And that's true not just for leadership, it's true for the vast majority of the positions that require conversation in order to be successful. Now, if you don't require conversation to be successful, you might do a job like being an engineer. And obviously you talk to other people as an engineer and you collaborate and all of those things, but the quality of your work is a function of your ability to solve an engineering problem, not a people problem. And so this may not be specifically for an engineering company or a specific engineer, but it's going to matter to
Can you be closer to your mic?
Oh, sorry. It's going to matter to the leaders, the leadership of that engineering company. The vast majority of companies have some degree of conversational skill required to be successful. But sales always, client success, customer success, retention always, marketing sometimes, leadership definitely. And so if you were to just look at the KPIs of your business, there's some percentage of your KPI performance that is a function of somebody's ability to use the right words in the right ways. And their ability to use those right words in the right ways, that's a skill that can be practiced. Just like shooting a free throw, just like kicking a soccer ball, just like writing a book or learning how to play an instrument, the more you have practice, the better you get at something. But that's not just completely true, because there's certain things that make you get better faster. We know these things to be true based on watching high performance organizations and high stakes organizations. What are the best practices that are used by the people who cannot fail, or where failure is such an incredibly expensive or painful thing that they do everything in their power to prevent it. Special Forces.
Hostage Negotiator.
Hostage Negotiator, right? Never Split the Difference is a great book to read for negotiation around that. How about surgeons? How about NFL teams, especially in the playoffs? How about professional athletes in general, right? Think about any arena where success leads to a really good outcome or failure leads to a really terrible outcome. And what you'll find is a common thread of the way those people practice. And what they do is they create simulation environments. Before the Super Bowl, the Seahawks probably spent a lot of time. They had a 2-week stretch with no games. They spent a lot of time simulating the type of defense and offense that the Patriots would run. I had on my podcast a couple months ago, I had on, I forget his exact title, but he was high-ranking Army official. And then he went to the UN for 20 years and he was in Gaza leading teams through humanitarian aid over the last several years. This guy is used to leading people in high-stakes environments. And what he shared with me is that if your anticipated mission time was 10 hours, we think this mission is going to take 10 hours to execute. You would add another 10 hours of practice and wargaming beforehand. So now the mission is going to take 20 hours. 10 of those are spent on practice. We don't do that in business. We don't give that degree of practice to our business, right? How often are you practicing? Is your sales team wargaming the most important sales calls they have that week? How many minutes per week do they spend role playing that? How many weeks do your leaders spend practicing accountability conversations that they might need to have as they go forth with doubling their staff over the next 2 years, if that's what's on your growth trajectory? Really great organizations would create simulation environments for that. And there's 4 common principles around simulation environments. They're quite simple. These are intuitive. They're not something I made up. They're something I observed that these high stakes, high reward organizations do well. The first thing they do is they create realistic training scenarios. If you've ever done a role play before where your boss can't properly pretend to be the customer, you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't work. The scenario has to be realistic. That's a basic. We're not hitting golf balls in basketball gyms. We're not doing goofy. We're not pretending to fly an airplane while we're playing the trumpet. Like, we're in a realistic scenario. The second thing you need is timely and accurate feedback. This is somewhat obvious, but if you've ever been a leader who does a one-on-one review with your team after a certain amount of time, once a week, once a month, you know how difficult it is to give feedback on a sales call that happened 3 weeks ago or on a deal that got blown up 2 months ago. It needs to be timely and it needs to be accurate, which means you have to have some way of seeing it. You don't know how the negotiation went just based on if a person said yes or no. You don't know if the person stumbled into success or if they masterfully navigated a difficult set of choppy waters in order to get there. So you got to have accurate feedback based on your visibility of the situation. This is why the Seahawks coaches watched them practice and saying, have a good practice, guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll see you at the end of the day. Well, they watched so that they could give timely, accurate feedback.
You probably were on the field next to the line.
They probably were, right? Might have been out there in the middle of it, trying to get the right angle on it. So you got to have realistic scenario. You got to have timely, accurate feedback. You need to have psychological safety. This is the most overlooked piece of the puzzle. You need to be in a situation where you can fail without consequence. That's what it's really all about. A practice is all about the ability to fail without consequence. Consequence, by the way, is not just winning or losing the sale. It's the impression your peers have of you. It's how highly your boss thinks of you. Anytime you've ever role played with a boss, you're not in practice mode. You're in holy shit, don't get fired by saying the wrong thing and revealing how bad I am at this to my boss mode. You cannot possibly receive good feedback if you're not in a psychologically safe state. So we need to simulate that in a realistic way, which is why
totally agree.
Sports teams will often kick everybody out during practice time. Hey, it's just the team, right? There's the staff, there are practices where the media can be there watching, and then there's practices where no one else is allowed here because we need to fail and screw up as much as we can without anybody really noticing that it's happening. If you create a realistic scenario and you give people the opportunity to fail safely and you give them timely and accurate feedback and you let them do it multiple times, it's the fourth piece of the recipe, you will have created a simulation environment where people are probably going to get significantly better. at the skills that really matter, and they're going to do so in a way that doesn't burn them out or make them feel like they're at risk. And that's how you level up talent. That's the commonality across any given organization that uses practice. And up to 2 years ago, this was really hard to build into your business. It was very difficult to do this for any company because role playing violates several of those things, right? None of us are professional actors, so our realism's bad. The feedback might not be that great depending on who you're role playing with, and it's definitely not psychologically safe, even if you can do it multiple times, which you can't. Most of the time you'd role play one thing one time, not 7. So it's been very difficult to do that. But my second company exists, Luminary, because as of 2 years ago, large language models are sufficiently good at natural language processing that we can create realistic scenarios because the AI avatar can pretend to be the other person incredibly well. We can put that and map it against timely and accurate feedback. So if there's a particular model that Seth follows for selling your business to XYZ buyer, we could train a different AI on that model to say, hey, Seth, how good of a job did you do when you interfaced with AI 1? So that we could score it against, with AI 2, we could score it against what a good job would have been. If you have a sales process or negotiation tactic that you know is the best, we'll teach a second AI that and we'll have it analyze the performance to give you timely, accurate feedback. You'll do this on your own cell phone or in front of your own computer with your door closed so that you're in a psychologically safe environment where you're ready to learn. And we'll let you click the retry button as much as you want because that's exactly how you get the number of reps under your belt required to turn it into muscle memory. And that's the goal of the simulation. It's not to have people simulate it. It's that they don't think when they go execute that play anymore. When the Seahawks walked up to the line, I keep referencing the Seahawks, by the way, because Seth and I are both Pacific Northwest guys and they just won the Super Bowl. Whether you like them or not is not the point.
Let's go Hawks.
For us, I thought you might. Right, when they walked up to the line and they had to read the Patriots shifting defense on 3rd and 3, they needed to not have to think about how the play would evolve if they dropped into cover 2 or if they blitzed. That needed to be instinctual between the quarterback and the receiver. And you can't get that by teaching it to somebody in the conference room. You get it by running the play a bunch of times. The good news is you don't need to run it an infinite number of times. What we find, and I don't know this to be true for football, so I won't speak to them, but what we find is that most professional skills, you need to practice between 12 and 20 times to turn it into muscle memory. That's kind of the required level of hit the retry button in order for somebody to get better at something. And we can visualize this. Think about somebody who's naturally pretty good at validating somebody, who has a decent amount of comfort using a validation statement or question. That might only take them 2, 3, 5 practice times before they're like, yeah, I don't ever need to practice that again. I got it. But if you've never done that before, and you're kind of socially uncomfortable and you're not even sure you read the person correctly, maybe you're not a very good active listener, you might need to practice 20 times. But on average, a dozen practice situations of a specific skill where you hit those 4 criteria for a simulation, you're going to go from a 2 to an 8. That's how we think about it, Seth. I'm not trying to build masters. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to take everybody in the organization from a 2 to an 8. Because if we had everybody at an 8 around validation or empathy or
close a lot of deals,
man, we would be so much better as an organization.
100%. You build, in the earlier part of what you went through, you're going to build a lot of trust with your manager for putting you in that spot to fail and not be punished and get the feedback. So then when it does matter, right, they understand. Now they obviously will know they're playing in a game. There's consequences. But during practice time, foul as much as you want. That's what it's for. Right. And getting these reps. And it is hard to do at business, right? Because time is so important. And the fact that you can train a model once, make that investment, and then have that and just observe it later and seeing how they did will definitely make every company more sales stickier and successful.
That's absolutely the case. And what we find is this doesn't take an enormous amount of investment from a time standpoint for anybody. We try to build programs that you can practice 30 minutes per week for 12 to 15 weeks. If we could work with an organization for leadership or sales or client success or whatever it is, and we could engineer a program where their people could practice for 30 minutes, which is a small bite of time. Everybody can find 30 minutes somewhere. And they do that for 12 to 15 weeks, depending on the program we build with them. What they'll find is their people will get those repetitions week in and week out. And when someone practices something in a psychologically safe place, and then they get to go use it for the next week, and then they come back and they practice it again, and then they go use it again for the next week, them doing that over an extended amount of time, rather than say your compliance software, where you watch the video once and say, yes, I completed it, and you pass the test and you're good to go, that doesn't work to develop skill. Repeated exposure over time and small bite-sized learning lessons, that structure makes it so it's a small time investment, and we can actually say, yeah, I know you're a busy professional, Seth, but 30 minutes a week you can find, because in 12 weeks, you're going to be a rock star at empathy or closing or whatever the situation might be. That's what it takes.
Love it. And obviously, this extends outside the corporate world. I coach competitive travel baseball, and you're seeing a lot of success with your elite sports coaches using the language of leadership. What can the corporate CEOs learn from sports psychology?
Well, the number one thing to learn from sports psychology is that on a sports team of any degree of competition, everybody wants more playing time. You have alignment
Absolutely.
Inherent in athletics. It's one of the unique things. It's one of the reasons why often a good sports coach not going to be that great of a business leader. And there's not a ton of case studies of this, but it just isn't common, because the inherent competition and drive of the athlete, I want to be here, I need to be better, is built into an athlete. That's not built into most professionals you're going to lead. So that will be an immediate gap between athletics and business. So one of the skills required in an environment where you don't have that degree of buy-in and competition is you must become an expert as a leader at generating buy-in and alignment. You have to constantly be seeking what's in it for them. It's obvious what's in it for the player. When you say, yo, you're running lines all day, brother. You're gassed in the game. I can't put you in the fourth quarter. Start running, homie. Like, they get it. It might suck, but they know why they're running. Most professionals are not going to respond that way because they don't know that they're doing something poorly enough. They're not seeing why it's good for them to run lines and increase their cardio. So you have to become an expert at leading people to alignment. And
you know that Gregory makes his team do sprints in the parking lot? He's doing suicides.
Yeah, that's I'd be curious to understand the alignment there, but it'd be fun to do together, I suppose. But if you don't recognize that right off the gate, that your people are not as bought in as the sports teams, you're going to have a hard time understanding why people don't try as hard as you do in your business. And this is a common thing for most business owners, right? They feel like, why I can't get my people to care as much as I do. Well, frankly, no duh. They're not the business owner. But even a leader, even the CEO who's not the leader, the GM or the team leader gets frustrated that their people aren't trying as hard as they are. And my answer when they let me be candid with them is, obviously, what have you done to help them see why their effort is good for them? And my old coach taught me this, what's in it for me, WII.FM. We are all tuned into this radio station. And if you can fine tune to their frequency and find out what's in it for them, maybe they're on a career trajectory. Maybe they need to make more money. Maybe they need more time off because their kids are home during the summer. Maybe they need a different skill because they think that's what's going to propel them into the future. If you don't know those things, you're going to have a hard time finding alignment when you try to get that person to run sprints in the parking lot. But if you can find it, if you know what that person is deeply after in their life, now all you're doing is helping them get there. It's so much easier. And by the way, I'll add this. Most people think what other people want more of is money. It's not. Most people don't care about money. They care about having enough money to live the lifestyle they would like to live. So if you know what that lifestyle is, then you can help them get to the right amount of money for that. But most people don't actually care that they have $5,000 more in their bank. Don't get me wrong, everybody would say yes to $5,000 more, but they probably won't do a lot more work to get $5,000 more. But they might do a lot more work to be able to cut that next tuition check, or to be able to take their wife on that vacation, or to build that deck that would let them barbecue with their family for the 4th of July. The deeper you know your people, the easier it will be to find that alignment, and then they'll behave a lot more like a sports team than they will a team who doesn't understand why they're running sprints.
I think you probably would agree if it was they felt they had the challenge and they respected their boss. You know, they say 85% of people leave their job because of their bosses, right? And if they're leaving because of their bosses, they didn't leave because of their paycheck. They left because they weren't respected or heard, to your points earlier, right? So those go with those things too. Like if you understand they want to be heard, they want to be challenged, they want to buy a deck, they want to get their kid into college, how to manage them from my side.
That is absolutely true. And look, most people don't leave terrible managers. Don't get me wrong, there are terrible managers. I don't want to discount the number potentially of toxic people out there in those roles. That's real. But that's not what most people are leaving. Most people are leaving mediocre or underengaged bosses because those bosses were never trained on how to actually be engaged and professional and hold you accountable. They either learned how to be your buddy or how to be a hard ass. Neither of those retain people very well. So mediocrity is what we leave more than terrible bosses. But yeah, most people leave because their boss was mediocre and they didn't help them get where they wanted to go, which is our freaking job as a leader.
It goes back to the black box, right?
Yeah, well, and we're trying to demystify the black box. It's not. It's 5 conversations. That's literally it. It's 8 if you want the full gamut of what it could be, but it's 5 for the vast majority of the time. That's all you have to know how to do. Now, sure, you got to learn your tech stack and reporting and requirements of your company. There's a lot of contextual knowledge, but the leadership part is actually simple, not easy.
So obviously there's buyers listening in our audience. They're looking at acquisitions. They want to know what's under the hood on their leadership that they're about to inherit, right, in their communication. How do they weed that out before they buy the company? Are there any tools or anything that they can do to sort of get an idea how well they're managing?
Well, great question. So let's go back to that individual who goes through that simulator that we concocted, right? Those 4 things that it takes to make a good scenario, a simulator. Let's say we've got an individual on our team that goes through that. Now let's say you've got everybody on your team that goes through that. And instead of trying to analyze one salesperson's performance, you're looking at a data set about how 50 salespeople do. And what you're seeing in that data set is how those 50 salespeople are able to follow all of the steps of a sales process. Every sale ever made has the same 7 steps. Doesn't matter if you're Sandler, Challenger, whatever. Every single sale has these 7 things. You're going to build rapport. You're going to discover needs in what we would call discovery. You're going to qualify whether they're the right person to make a decision or a good customer. You're going to value match the proposition that seems to make sense to them, and you're going to close. And then you're objection handling, and then you're going to close again. That's selling. So if you were to inherit a sales team and you're wondering like, I wonder if they're any good or not, what I would want to know is who's good at which parts of that process, which you can't get as an acquirer. In fact, you can't get that as a sales manager. All you've got is vibes and KPIs from your CRM and your P&L. But if you had a set of simulators that matched all 7 of those things, and you had all 50 of your people go through those 12 times, which would level up each one of your salespeople dramatically, by the way, you could actually hand anybody a data set that's like, here's how good my sales team is at the process that produces sales, not just the sales numbers themselves. And if you could do that for leadership, which you can, again, there's 5 skills, we have it in the language of leadership, then you could easily say, all right, I want every leader in your company to go through this because I want to assess what they're good at and what they're bad at. I want to know what I'm acquiring, not just the outcomes, but the process is consistently leading to the outcomes, which is what I'm really buying. Then yeah, you could absolutely measure that. And if you needed it specific to a particular skill set or version of leadership or industry context, that's what Luminary builds. But the ability to run a team through a set of simulators that accurately portray reality and that reflect the skills required to be successful in the business creates what we call professional skill intelligence. And that's a layer that I think is going to become part of any good managerial system, and also potentially part of the data vault you would use to convey why you should consider buying my company, as someone's going through the acquisition process as well.
So John Doe buys the company. What should his first 90 days look like from his communication and people management?
Well, I'm going to skip past the natural instinct to go learn the freaking business really well and hope that nothing's on fire you have to spend your time on. So let's say he actually gets to arrive and be like, what should I do? I'm going to give that same advice I would give to any leader. I don't care if you're the new boss, the new owner, the new GM, the new sales VP, the new team lead. You cannot lead people if you do not know where they are trying to go. And until you make a connection with the people. And you can't do that, maybe the company of scale, you can't do that with every single human being, but you can do that with your direct reports and make sure they do with their direct reports. If you don't know where your people are trying to go, you're going to have a hard time tuning in to WIFM, which means any new idea you have, you're going to meet the barrier of organizational change. Ideally, you bought a business where you show up and don't have to do anything. The likelihood of that being the case is probably pretty low. So you're going to have to do something, which means you're going to have to get people to do something they would not have done otherwise. In fact, you're going to have to get them to do something the previous boss may have told them they should never do, or that they don't want to do, or that would be bad for them. That might include adopting AI, for example. If you don't think about the organizational change requirement of that, you're going to have a very hard time, even if it's the best idea ever. So you're going to need to spend that 90 days listening, asking. When I was at Victaulic, my old company where I ended up building the language of leadership, I spent a decade as a sales leader there. We had a new CEO who moved in right as I joined the company. So I didn't get to see this, but I heard of it. I wasn't a sales leader yet, but I heard of it, where our new CEO traveled around the country to every geography and just listened, asked, why do we do it that way? What do you think our customers are thinking about? How have we tried to do that in the past? What do you think the right idea might be when you bump into that? And he gained an enormous amount of trust because he went and listened to his people. And he came up with significantly better answers than he ever would have come up with before, because the people who are on the ground probably know a thing or two about what might work really well for them. And so when he decided to start saying, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, people were bought in, they had trust. And a lot of the ideas that he was espousing were reflections of what the team thought they should be doing anyway, but they'd previously been blocked. So that first 90 days, ask, listen, validate, empathize, create human connection, and then go.
There's a book called The First 90 Days. That's pretty good, pretty close. Yeah.
Is it really? I haven't read that one. That's cool.
I love having you on the show. This was an amazing podcast. Any last words of wisdom before we close out?
I think people often do believe that skillful conversation is a black box. Leadership is one we've referred back to several times, but it's not just leadership. It's anytime your people's job is to be influential. That could be the convenience store clerk. That could be the middle manager at Netflix. That could be a nonprofit executive director. It doesn't matter what the title is, what industry you're in. There's this part of your business that is a function of skillful conversation, and it isn't a black box. You can influence it if you integrate simulation, and you can do so at scale you've never been able to do so before with what we do at Luminary, or heck, with ChatGPT. Look, what I'm talking about is a deployable, scalable, safe way to do it. You could go to ChatGPT tomorrow and say, I want you to act like the most difficult customer, and these are 3 recordings of difficult customers, and then you could make your people go through it. You don't need to pay me to build a simulation system with technology today. But if you're not doing something to simulate that, I'd challenge you to recognize you're not serving your people very well, and you're probably not setting your business up to survive a transition or be as valuable as it would be if this was something you took seriously. So I hope you take some time to go and do that, and I hope you work with Seth when the time comes to do so.
Thank you so much, Erik. I've learned a lot. It's always good talking with you again.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. See you, everybody.
His information will be at the end. Thank you for joining Entrepreneurship Unlocked, and please follow us on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or YouTube. Thank you very much.